all the places on Earth that are home to exquisite species, Southern Africa is particularly noted. But its flora and fauna stand prone to increasingly violent climate change within the next decades. And that's a prediction that's come to have scientific credibility only very recently.
Climate change is happening. Climate change is most likely the result of man-made activities, and climate change will be with us for at least 100 years to come.
Proof that climate change is happening has been discovered in Southern Africa. This is the story of that discovery and why it's so important to world-class biodiversity hotspots. It involves two scientists and the Quiver tree. The two scientists, Wendy Foden and her supervisor Guy Midgley, from the South African National Biodiversity Institute, chose the desert succulent, the Quiver tree, to predict what the future holds. Wendy flies to Windhoek to start her journey of discovery in Namibia, in the desert northwest of the capital, at Brandberg Mountain, the hottest place that quiver trees can survive, but have they? And will there be any young ones?
But no, we will find in some. I'm pretty sure, I'm very much hoping, when we land at Windhoek, we've got to go up to Okahanja and then across to Karabib, Isakos, and then up towards the Brandberg.
The quiver tree, or Allodichotoma, also known as the cockaboom, is a large succulent tree that grows exceedingly slowly in the arid desert in an area called the Succulent Karoo Biodiversity Hotspot. These resilient trees can live for hundreds of years, but as the climate heats up, so new trees will have to grow where it's cooler.
There are the trees. We found them. I'm not sure how much further we can drive. Wow, these were giants when they died.
Computer simulations of climate predictions show the extent of a species' range and what happens over time. They have to migrate.
It highlights the whole problem of migration for organisms that are essentially sedentary. So we're asking sedentary organisms, which have established an equilibrium with climate for thousands of years, to suddenly become able to move. And that's a tough ask.
The quiver tree only exists between 22 and 33 degrees of latitude. The northern end is the hottest and marked by Namibia's highest mountain, the Brandberg, which is where Wendy is now assessing the health of the population by measuring circumferences and estimating ages.
In the way, but we'd reckon it at about 2 meters, 2.03 meters. We need to get an estimate of height. I would guess this one to be well over 100 years, maybe 130, but that's just really from what we can tell from looking at photos through time. We reckon possibly big ones like that would be maybe 300, 350 years. Take a picture here. Absolutely. Began to hear stories about dead quiver trees. People raising concerns about a large amount of death of these trees, particularly up in Namibia. My supervisor, Guy Midgley, had the idea that possibly it was related to climate change. Now, I didn't believe him. But I was doing my master's, and we set out to go and find out what was killing these trees.
Wendy and her crew surveyed 54 sites and over 6,000 trees to assess the health of quivers based on where they grow.
Ah, we've just spotted 2 juveniles. Ah, and there's another one over there. I think that could be one, yeah. There's another big one there, and then there's 2 juveniles here.
At the northern, hottest end of their range, Wendy found a disproportionate number of dead and dying trees.
So this is a nice big adult that has died.
The real question is, why are they dying?
Biggest tree around. see inside there is the trunk of a dead quiver tree. It was a huge one. On our left, we have a very dead quiver tree. We've entered the graveyard.
All the trees have to be surveyed to be able to statistically work out why the trees are dying. Large ones may have died of old age, but if many are small, then clearly something else is happening.
7, 8, 9, 10. It's not a particularly old tree, but it's in very bad shape. You can see that it's losing its leaves, branching off its leaves. Its canopy's almost gone. Well, it's lost about half of it. Now, this tree is certainly not a fully mature tree, and yet it's in very bad shape. It definitely looks like it's losing a lot of its canopy. It just looks extremely stressed. To take a walk through this section of the population and count number of lives and deaths, so we can already see there's no lives here.
The causes of death could be old age, fungus, animal damage, or heat stress. By not finding obvious causes of death, Wendy increasingly suspects drought.
Decomposition. And again, it's almost impossible to tell at this stage, but no obvious signs of damage by an animal or, yeah, and not standing, and there's no signs of damage.
By data logging all the trees in an area, Wendy can work out what the prevalent cause is, and heat stress caused by drought seems to be the front runner.
But I'm looking at what could possibly have killed this tree, and I don't see any major signs of damage. It doesn't look like it was eaten by anything or knocked down by anything before it died. We can't really determine what killed it.
Wendy's finding that at the northern end of their range, drought is now so extreme that quiver trees can't survive. Once, there were forests here.
Yeah, this would be a forest about 100 years ago, and now it's a, yeah, now it's a graveyard. It's always exciting as a scientist when you find something new. It was a discovery. I knew it was one of the first examples in the world of such a find, and obviously that's great, but also sad because I'm a botanist and a biologist, and I really feel a strong sense of duty of care for our biodiversity, and realizing that if it is climate change, we have a huge job ahead of us to try and actually conserve what we can.
The other end of their range is 2,000 kilometres south, where it's cooler, and Wendy heads off to see what's happening to the species there. Guy, meanwhile, is driving north of Van Reinsdorp to his research group's experiments in the desert to see if his climate change computer predictions are right, based on the field evidence.
Pretty much as we do in a model where we try and simulate future climates, this accelerates climate change and takes us forward different ranges of years. In fact, what Charles has done is use chambers of different heights, which give a range of temperature increases. So we have 2-degree increase, 3-degree increase, 4-degree increase, which takes us to 2030, 2050 and 2070 to see whether there's a kind of a threshold warming which is going to be a problem.
Well, essentially what we have is light passing through a transparent barrier. Just the shortwave radiation passes through, converted to longer wave warming radiation, and the air is trapped inside here and basically warms.
This is an example of something that's died. It looks like almost like a little barnacle. There's a live one. There's a dead one.
Guy and Charles have created a way of simulating climate change that shows that a 2-degree increase in temperature is enough to kill indigenous plants. The temperature's already increased by 1/4 degree in the last 10 years, and by 2050, Guy thinks, it will be 2 degrees hotter.
The whole sort of ecology of an area, all the different living and non-living pieces of an environment that interact together, and how they interact, why, and if you change things like, for example, turn up the heat and the climate, then what happens?
Reading here. Oh, the FT's too low.
There's a too low.
Charles has just got a new gadget for measuring photosynthesis. That's how plants use light to convert carbon into energy.
Nothing. No, they're shut down.
The plant's photosynthesis doesn't seem to want to register on the scale.
It's not taking any readings at this stage.
A succulent in a pot, though, proves the gadget is working, but that plants in the ground are trying to survive a fierce climate by shutting down.
I think the issue is that are they shutting down for longer and longer as the conditions get less and less?
Well, that's the sort of...
less and less optimal. Our experiments are telling us that we don't have very much time to turn around the global warming trend. Some of our experiments suggest that 2 degrees is probably too much for many, many species. So while around the world 2 degrees is seen as a kind of a safe level of climate change, I would be a little bit worried that 2 degrees is a bit high for the succulent karoo.
2 degrees of future temperature increase hasn't yet hit the New Witteveld forest, 2,000 kilometres south of the dead trees of Brandberg.
We're in the New Witteveld population, right at the very south of the range of the Quiver trees. We've come more than 2,000 kilometres south from the population where we saw all the dead trees. And now we're looking at one of the healthiest populations in the Quiver trees range. Here we've got 3 trees, 3 juveniles of different age, looking very healthy.
Wendy compulsively compiles a log of healthy trees, finding death here is much more likely to be due to old age.
A dead tree. Now this population is looking overall extremely healthy. Got dead old ones, but that's quite normal. This one was very old by the time it died.
One of the most amazing things about a site like this is that from the Northern Hemisphere perspective, and the big modelers who model global vegetation, would at the most predict maybe a 5% cover of sort of a scattered, low, shrubby vegetation type. But what do we find? Well, we find a forest of trees. And I think that's a really fantastic thing, because the best models in the world would never have come up with the idea that one could get a forest of desert trees in an environment like this. So this species somehow has found a solution to one of the toughest environments in the world.
I'm seeing hundreds and hundreds of young quiver trees all over these slopes, right over the top of that slope and onto the plains. They're looking really great, very healthy. This is a great population. It's a trend that we're finding. We're certainly seeing that in these populations like this one, which is the furthest south in the quiver trees range, we're definitely getting many more juveniles than up north and much less mortality. And it is a trend that is consistent across the range, that we're getting better recruitment and less mortality the further south. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing to actually see the contrast between the two places, and just even to feel it. It feels, I mean, the place does feel completely different. Eerie. And this place is just thriving, this weird interforest. I remember clearly the moment that I looked at that graph that I drew, and I saw that it so clearly showed that there was this pattern, and that the only explanation was climate change, and it was just mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing. It was very exciting as a scientist, but it was also extremely disturbing. Didn't know whether to be happy or sad.
Why sad?
Well, it's showing that climate change is happening. The things we were worried about were true. How we could just find a clever way of aging them.
Quiver trees, Wendy had discovered, are effectively moving their range south, but research doesn't stop there. The two scientists share their obvious passion for quiver trees. Surprisingly, Wendy and Guy have never been in the field together. Their meeting turns into a brainstorming session about finding a reliable way to date the trees. Apart from comparing old photos, conventional techniques don't work, as the trees don't have tree rings.
Water stored, I mean, just feel it.
Yeah. Hey, we did that thing for a while where we were trying to measure the bumps.
Oh, really?
Remember, but look, you can see, like, it was a good year, that was a bad year, it was a good year, bad year. Yeah, a lot of these have already been dispersed, but there's still some in.
Because quiver trees only germinate, or recruit as Wendy says, every 15 years, Wendy isn't sure the seeds can travel the 40 kilometres needed to keep ahead of climate change.
Millions of seeds floating around the landscape. Yeah, it takes nothing to just get them going.
If they recruited once every 15 years, they were going to need to go 40 kilometres in that time to actually keep it in their range.
It's those extreme, extreme wind events, like, a dust devil will come through and just pull seeds up really high and then move them. So I think they can go pretty far.
I think now the world has really woken up and realised that climate change is real and it's happening. So we've got these indicators. We've now just got to figure out globally what we do about it, and that's where the main debate sits now. How do we, for one, get the carbon out of the atmosphere and stop putting more up there, and two, how do we actually adapt to the fact that the climate, no matter what we do, will still be changing?
Maybe corridors are an answer. That means adapting the landscape so species like quiver trees, and animals too, can migrate as the climate hots up. Wendy discusses how to help the species with her friend from college days, Rowena Smuts, a conservation strategist who's planning wildlife corridors linking transfrontier game parks, such as one in Botswana.
In the project, even though it's not based on climate change models, it actually fits in very well with climate and rainfall patterns. That's the original motivation for creating those corridors.
Okay, and
is to enable.
The corridor runs north to south or east?
It runs sort of northeast to southwest.
Okay.
And would allow those animals to move along the rainfall gradient. So should it get drier in one part of Botswana, they'd be able to shift to another part.
Okay, that sounds really very useful. I mean, it does make them particularly useful in a way that national conservation...
Use of corridors to link ecosystems together and to get them to function naturally is inherently a very, very good one. We have quite a bit of good science to suggest that this should work.
Southern Africa is full of wildlife parks set up to conserve biodiversity and create a tourist industry. Just lately, there's been a move to join some of them up to create trans-frontier conservation areas or corridors to help plants and animals move. The Three Nations Namib Desert area includes the quiver trees, the Kavango Zambezi area links 5 countries, and the Western Kalagadi corridor in the most threatened area of all, in Botswana.
So there are many, many processes afoot in the natural biosphere which could accelerate climate change, and they're very, very worrying. And for this reason, I think we need to get a very, very serious wake-up call that we don't have a lot of time left to sort this issue out.
Until now, few people have thought much about how climate change is going to threaten wildlife. But conservation professionals are starting to realize they'd better start.
With the reduction of rain and with the rising of temperatures, we are losing some species because they cannot tolerate the new temperature and rainfall regimes. While the Zambezi can shape the ecology at a smaller level, climatic changes, which are at a global level, will certainly determine the kind of impacts it can have on the environment and the people.
For people living here, tourism has become hugely important and boosts low incomes. And for attractions to continue to have wildlife, corridors that allow for migration of species will depend on cooperation with local people. The impact of climate change is already being noticed.
This is dry. It's hot days.
Priska sees climate change as the fault of those beyond her village, who think they can control nature.
Then you want to control the sun. How are you going to control the sun? When we are just people, we are not God.
Never in the history of mankind we have destroyed biodiversity as we are doing it. Every hour, 3 species disappear. Every day, between 100 to 150 species are disappearing. Every year, between 15 to 80,000 species are disappearing, and they are the result of thousands of years of evolution.
We cannot afford to fiddle around arguing about whether this is going to be a significant impact. We're virtually certain that climate change is a problem.
The extinction of species is already happening. Fighting that disaster puts scientists like Guy and Wendy on the front line.
It's quite depressing to be working on it all the time, but at the same time it'd be more depressing not to be doing your bit.